So I want to talk today about interviewing. I don't know if I have a lot of, I'm just going to give a couple brief comments about it. First of all, with any time you do an interview, I would recommend you write your questions out beforehand. This is especially true when you're newer, but I think even as you get more experience, you should write out the questions. Before you go to any interview, you want to know as much as you can beforehand. You don't want to come in there like me. Here's the thing. You've asked somebody, hey, can I have some of your time? And if, maybe at your age, time's pretty invaluable. Maybe, you're looking for anything to do to occupy your time. But I can tell you, like, for me, I'm not really bored. I mean, I have 2 kids. I have a wife who's pregnant. I have, a cat back here that needs my attention. If you can see him over there. He does not like me, so that's not true. Anyway, it's my wife's. Anyway, the case is that, I have a lot of things going on. I'm busy. I have volunteer work. I have the idea of giving up, 30 minutes of my time for an interview is asking something. And so it's kind of rude to show up and then not have a clue. I've gone to like a job interview where you go in and the person hasn't even looked at your resume. They don't know where you went to school. They don't know what they don't know anything about you. I mean, or where you've worked or what you've done. And I've gone to interviews like that, and it's kind of a little bit, annoying when, you've spent the whole day prepping, maybe a couple of days prepping for an interview, and, it's a really big job you really want. And the person has no clue, and you're kind of like, oh, I'm starting back at square one. Now, there's nothing wrong with going through all that stuff, but, when the people, and so my point of all this is do your research. Before you go, read every article, Google the person, read what you can about them, look at their Facebook, look at their LinkedIn. These could give you questions that are of some value. They may indicate, things that you find interest, show that. Second of all, you do as much research as you can. If you work for a publication, usually they have old files. You can search within those files for the person's name. They used to have a paper drawer system called a morgue, and the morgue or the library, and there was just clippings of every time a person's name was used. Somebody in a library would cut the story out, circle the name, put it in an envelope with the person's name on it, and file it away in the belly of the publication. Now, they don't do that anymore. Everything's digitized, so you can just search the name via like a Google search of just the local archive. Now, why do you do that? Because you want to see how they may have done a profile. They may have had 2 stories about the topic before. That's what you're looking for, is you're looking to have as much information. That way you can ask smart questions specific to the person. Write out all those questions. You may not ask all of them. You may not get all of them, but get as many as you can. Second of all, the questions shouldn't come before, don't just go read the question, not listen. Okay, next question, not listen. Ask the question, listen. It's good if you can take notes and just write down the things as you're talking, but looking at them, you can hold a notepad and just sort of write while you're talking. The other thing is you can record it. That's always good, especially when you have a little bit more time to listen back to your recordings. Just say, hey, do you mind if I record this? Listen, then you can listen back to it, and then you don't have to be quite as close. But the point is even if you're taking notes, even if you're recording, pay attention. And even if you're recording, still take notes, because the recorders sometimes don't work. And so, those are just a couple little tips, but, be paying attention. And if they say something that sounds interesting, or they say something that, was unexpected, ask a question. This is a conversation. It's not just all right, I got 6 questions I have to ask them. Boom, 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 boom. You're trying to get them to talk. Now, as far as interviewing, always come in and try to make the person comfortable. If you know a person and you've had a few interviews, that usually helps. Realize people who've never met you or interviewed with you are maybe getting a little more uncomfortable. Your goal is to get them comfortable. You may want to come in and just sort of be nice and be like, look around, if you're in their office or in their home, look around and go, oh, are those your kids? Oh, I have kids, or that kid, yeah, my niece went as Princess Leia for Christmas last year, whatever it is, right? Have some conversation, kind of try to break the ice, make them realize you're not the devil because you are a journalist, and just sort of, get them comfortable with this. And so that's the thing, is you want to make people comfortable, you want to have a good rapport, and you want to get them, to give information. Now, when you're writing questions, as you do beforehand, don't write questions as yes or no. And don't write questions that are kind of stupid. You can write open-ended questions. But if you're going to interview somebody about the death of their kid, don't ask them, so how did that make you feel? It made me feel great. Come on. You could ask, like, can you tell me about your emotions, or how have you been handling it? What's been toughest, things like that. But don't ask just like, how did it make you feel? That's a bad question. There are bad questions. People will tell you there are no bad questions, but they're wrong. There are bad questions. Questions like, how did you feel when your kid died, is a bad question. And when you ask it, that is a bad sign. And so I'm just letting you know, okay? The other thing is, don't ask yes, no questions. So were you sad? Yeah. That's not going to make for a very good quote or story. Yeah. Did you get the job? Yeah. Okay. That's going to make a good quote. Yeah. So, you may want to ask questions like, how did it feel when you found out you finally got the job? Not how did you feel when your kid died, but you would say, what's been toughest, or, is there times that, are particularly deep and dark, or, how do you get up in the morning? Things like that, where the person has to think about it, because you're trying to get them to give answers that you can quote, you can use, and give you information you don't expect. Don't assume the answers. Don't ask yes, no. Yes or no assumes you know what the answer is. Don't ask yes, no. Don't do that. Now, the other thing is do the interview face-to-face, if possible. Person to person. Phone is better than email. Email is kind of the worst case scenario. The reason is, there's 3 reasons. One, first of all, when you're person to person, you can read facial expressions. And so if, the person kind of, if you say, like if you said, were you, how did it feel when you found out, that, you were going to be, a dad, or how did you feel when you got that job? And they kind of like, it was good. Like they give a little bit of a facial expression, or they wince, or they're kind of like, or they maybe look at their spouse or something else. There's something more there, right? Those are expressions that give away that there's something more there. And so, you're looking for that. You can get that better in person. You get it in a phone call with verbal cues, but they don't get it as well as you do with facial and nonverbal cues. But if you do it via email, you never get any of those cues. You never know any of that stuff that's happening. You just simply ask the question. You can't ask any follow-ups, and people don't usually volunteer follow-ups. So it is better to ask those questions face-to-face, where you can read the person. So the first reason is you can see the emotion. Second of all, you can ask follow-ups. And then the other reason, the big reason I think also is people are less guarded in person than they are on the phone, and they're less guarded on the phone than they are in email. This works everywhere, okay? Now, if you have a problem and you need to ask your professor for a little bit extra time on an exam, or you have a problem. If you email your professor, it is very easy for them to just simply go no and be done, right? I can read the email, I can think about the email, and I can give the most simple response, and I can be pretty tough. If a person calls me up and says, Professor McKenzie, I've had this problem, blah, blah. I definitely am. It's harder for me because I'm on the spot, right? I'm like, okay, yeah, you can have a little more time. I mean, it's just more difficult. And if you ask a person in person, you come into their office, you're crying, you're sitting there talking, it's a lot harder to say no when somebody asks for something. And so the reality is you get the best response. People usually are doing that. And especially when they build a rapport, you don't build a rapport via email. You build a rapport in person. And so when a person comes in and you've built a rapport, they oftentimes will tell you things. I have found over and over again that, if I send somebody an email and I want to try to find something out that I want some information, and I just send them an email, they're not going to tell me for the most part. But I've always found that, like, sometimes if I want information on things that nobody else, I'll just come in and I'll just start talking about their kids or, the weather or whatever, just small talk. And then I'll be like, oh, hey, I saw this thing. Have you seen anything about it? And usually pretty quickly with some verbal cues, they know what they're talking about. And they can be like, yeah. And you can go like, so what's going on there, right? And what I've always found is people are usually pretty willing to talk. Now, you can't use duplicitous manners when you're a reporter, but you definitely will find people are more willing to talk and more willing to give information when you're talking to them in person versus when you're on the phone or in an email. So as a general rule, don't use email, don't use social media, don't use the phone if possible. Go sit face to face, build rapport, read those verbal cues, and then ask your questions. Don't stick to a script, but have the questions written. And then at the end, as you're kind of going back through, check off the questions, be like, I asked that, I said, okay, I got all those. Oh, and last but not least, every good interview, it's always a good thing to say at the end and say, is there anything you wanted to elaborate on? Or is there anything that I didn't ask you feel like maybe I should have asked? Give a person kind of an open forum where they may be going, yeah, you didn't ask me about this and I wanted to ask, give them a chance. A lot of times they'll say no, and that's fine. But at least don't let them leave thinking, okay, well, that's all I got. I'm going to get going now, and not give them a chance to say something that's on their mind. Give people a feeling, that way they feel like they've had their opportunity to have their say. And last but not least, I threw that last thing in, and I'm throwing in one more thing. Whenever you interview somebody, if you do it in person, if you just walk up to them on the street, whatever you do, it's always a good idea to just say, hey, do you mind if I get your phone number or email or some sort of contact information in case I have any questions or there's anything unclear when I'm looking at my notes? Chances are you won't need that, but it always helps because, every once in a while you get something and you realize it's not there, or you might talk to a source who's really good and they know about other things, and it's just nice to have that written down somewhere. So those are all good things to do. Always have some sort of follow-up information. You may end up figuring out you have something misspelled or you have a quote you're not sure about, and you can get it all clarified.